The ski trip without me. The slick paper whispered beneath Leo's touch. His fingers traced a skier suspended against a cerulean sky, sunlight flashing off the reflective lenses. Snowbird Resort, the brochure boasted in vibrant letters. Leo hadn't a clue where Snowbird was located, but the glossy images promised an alabaster realm, a place where the laws of physics seemed to bend and the atmosphere tasted of pure exhilaration. He flipped the page, lost in the picture of a chairlift scaling impossible heights, miniature figures dangling like ornaments against the backdrop of serrated summits. 10. He'd turned 10 in a fortnight. Surely old enough to challenge those peaks. He slid the brochure beneath his mattress, a clandestine treasure. His birthdays tended to be anticlimactic. Cake, gifts, a manufactured joviality that felt obligatory. But this year, hope flickered within him. He'd sown the seeds. Offhand remarks about powder conditions, carefully curated ski videos, even an overlong treatise on the mechanics of moguls. The kitchen, normally a cacophony of clattering cookware and exasperated sighs, was unusually hushed. His mom, a rare sight at the stove, was actually cooking instead of resorting to the microwave. Dad sat at the table, absorbed by his phone. Maya, his older sister, meticulously lacquered her nails a shade of glacial blue. "Family pow-wow!" Dad announced, clapping his hands. Mom killed the burner, a fleeting shadow of something akin to apprehension crossing her features. Apprehension? Why? "We have a surprise," she stated with forced enthusiasm. "A real whopper." Leo's pulse quickened. He envisioned himself on that chairlift, the wind roaring in his ears, the sun kissing his cheeks. A ski trip. It had to be. "We're going to Snowbird." Maya squealed, nearly upending her nail polish in her excitement. "Snowbird?" Leo echoed, a question etched on his face. The name resonated. "Yep," Dad exclaimed. "Your mother and I thought we deserved a little R&R, and Maya's been grinding. She needs a break." Leo fixed his gaze on them, the brochure suddenly an icy weight in his thoughts. "When?" he managed, his voice thin. "Next week," Mom responded, avoiding eye contact. "It's a surprise, remember? Pack your bags, Maya, we leave at dawn Saturday." He fought the urge to rail, to demand answers. But the words remained locked within him, replaced by a wave of disappointment so potent it felt like a physical blow. He was turning 10. This was meant to be his year. He mumbled about needing to study and slipped away to his sanctuary, the door clicking shut. He retrieved the brochure, its flawless images now a cruel taunt. A ski trip to Snowbird. Without him. Later, feigning absorption in a novel, he strained to decipher the hushed tones filtering from the living room. "He'll be fine," his mom was asserting. "It's just for a few days, and Aunt Carol is happy to keep him company." Aunt Carol, perpetually redolent of mothballs, whose conversations revolved solely around her feline companions. This was their masterstroke? "But it's his birthday," Dad countered, his tone gentler. "Shouldn't we, at least—" "He'll have a party when we get back," Mom cut in. "And frankly, David, he's not exactly the most gregarious. He wouldn't even enjoy it that much." A sharp sting hit Leo. Not gregarious? He wasn't a hermit. He simply preferred the company of books and puzzles to whatever occupied Maya and her clique. He heard Maya's saccharine voice, dripping with false empathy. "Yeah, Dad, he'd rather stay home and play with his Lego. Besides," she added, a sharp edge to her tone, "this is my chance to wow the ski team coach. I need this. Impress the ski team coach. Naturally." Maya's ambition invariably overshadowed everything else. He closed his book, the words dissolving into abstract shapes. He wasn't enraged. Not really, he was invisible, non-existent. They were plotting this spectacular escapade, this pristine, snow-covered dream, and he was nothing more than an inconvenience, a minor obstacle to be fobbed off on a distant relative. A new sensation began to stir within him, a cold, unyielding resolve. He wouldn't allow them to define him. He wouldn't be the overlooked son, the oddball kid content with books. He would prove them wrong, all of them. He opened his laptop, the screen illuminating his face. He typed Snowbird Resort into the search bar. He scrolled past the idyllic slopes and luxurious lodgings, past the beaming faces of satisfied skiers. He clicked on About Us, his eyes devouring the information. Ownership, management, investors. He spent the rest of the night immersed in research, the sting of rejection slowly evolving into a fierce drive. He didn't know precisely how, but one thing was clear. He would never be relegated to the sidelines again. He would take charge of his own destiny. He would ensure they never underestimated him again. The image of that chairlift, ascending toward the sun-drenched peaks, burned in his mind. He wouldn't merely ride the chairlift, he would claim the mountain as his own, a lonely birthday. A deflated azure number 10 drooped against the wall, mirroring the state of Leo's morale. At least they'd remembered the balloon. At breakfast, his father's hand tousled his hair, a rote gesture, light on warmth. Happy 10th, champ, big milestone. Then, a monologue about quarterly projections, eclipsing Leo's untouched breakfast cakes. A gift-wrapped cube appeared, revealing, predictably, 101 science experiments. Leo pasted on a grin. Thoughtful, yes, but a recurring theme in his gift-giving history. He yearned for something, resonant, an acknowledgement. We see you, Leo. Maya, already suited up for the slopes, blew in, grabbing a Granny Smith. Happy birthday! Training day! Catch you later. The wink lacked spark, her mind was already on moguls. Chaos escalated as departure loomed. Suitcases bumped on the stairs, a chorus of, "Where's my?" and "Did you pack?" Leo retreated to the living room corner, clutching his consolation prize. He'd inventory projects for his incarceration with Aunt Mildred. Maybe a potato battery was in order, or a snowbird teleportation device. Finally, the behemoth SUV, brimming with skis, stood ready. A brief maternal hug delivered a fleeting wave of vanilla and a sharp chemical note. Souvenir incoming, she promised, eyes already assessing traffic flow. A paternal clap. Be good, we'll call. Which he wouldn't. A beat longer from Maya. A possible pang of guilt flickered, then vanished. Try not to raise the place, she quipped, her smile flimsy before she vanished into the back beside her gear. On the porch, bracing mountain air did little to improve his outlook as the SUV lumbered away, tires grinding on the drive. The taillights dissolved into blurry streaks as it rounded the bend. A tidal wave of solitude crashed over him, a vice around his heart. The subsequent silence was a suffocating blanket. He was utterly alone. He wandered back inside. The limp balloon became a cruel jibe at the day's hollow pretense. His gaze snagged on the kitchen tableau, abandoned cakes, a gnawed apple core, the unopened book. It seemed staged, a meticulous depiction of a life he wasn't truly living. Enter Mrs. Higgins, bless her soul, precisely at midday, bearing a tilted chocolate creation. Happy decennial, my little Einstein, she declared, voice booming through the vacant rooms. 10 years young. Time for sugar and some fiscal wisdom? She produced a crumpled article on market trends. He summoned a smile. Her eccentricities were a well-meant effort, but nothing could puncture the leaden weight settling upon him. Later, sequestered in his room, the drone of Aunt Mildred's television, a constant hum, Leo stared out at the snow-crested peaks, Snowbird beckoned, a phantom world. He began flipping through his new tome, ideas suddenly igniting. He wouldn't let this birthday define him. He refused to be the forgotten child, left behind as everyone else lived it up. A plan was coalescing, fueled by bitterness and a desperate need for validation. He'd make them see him, regret their careless departure. The book snapped shut, resolve hardening his features. The experiments could wait. He had grander schemes brewing, starting with acquiring a ski resort. The accidental investor. The quiet in the Maxwell house pressed down like a leaden weight. Leo drifted through empty rooms, each a stark chamber amplifying his isolation. On the kitchen counter, the orphaned birthday cake stood as a sugary cenotaph to a celebration that had withered before it bloomed. He prodded the frosting absently with a fork, the sugary taste failing to sweeten his mood. The thought of calling Michael, his closest confidant, felt futile. What could he even say? Family vacation trumps birthday, wanna frag some noobs? It sounded pathetic, a verbal admission of his own inconsequence. The staircase to his room seemed to stretch, each step an arduous climb. His parents were likely airborne already, guzzling overpriced airport coffee and sharing private jokes that excluded him. He shoved his bedroom door closed, the thud muffled by the thick pile of the carpet. A tentative knock broke the silence. "Leo, dear? It's Mrs. Higgins." He groaned inwardly. Their well-meaning, if slightly eccentric, neighbor was the last person he craved company from. Yet, dismissing her would be impolite, and he didn't need a maternal scolding later. He opened the door to find Mrs. Higgins radiating cheer, a precarious tower of cookies balanced on a plate. "Happy belated birthday, sweetie. It's a little something, I know, but I baked these just for you. Chocolate chip, if memory serves?" He forced a smile. "Thanks, Mrs. Higgins." She waltzed into the room, her kaleidoscopic floral dress a jarring contrast to the room's subdued palette. "Now, what's with all the gloom and doom? Double digits is a marvelous milestone. Worlds to conquer." She deposited the plate on his desk, showering crumbs onto his homework. Leo slumped onto his bed. "They're gone. Ski trip. Forgot my birthday. Mrs. Higgins tutted sympathetically. "Oh, you precious thing. Well, don't you fret. Families can be distracted. How about I regale you with the time I hunted for Nessie?" Now that was an escapade. For the better part of an hour, Mrs. Higgins spun elaborate yarns of her supposed global adventures. Leo listened with half an ear, tossing in the occasional obligatory query. He found a fragile solace in her presence, her oddities a pleasant diversion from his own woes. "You know, Mrs.?" Higgins concluded, patting his hand. "Sometimes the grandest quests are lurking right under our noses. Have you ever ventured into your attic, Leo? A veritable repository of forgotten treasures." The attic, it had been ages. His parents used it as a dumping ground for cast-off furniture and dusty cartons. Cobwebs and moth-eaten relics, most likely. Still, anything beat wallowing. "Maybe," he mumbled. "Once Mrs. Higgins finally took her leave, leaving behind a smattering of crumbs and the lingering aroma of lavender. Leo opted to heed her words. He located the attic stairs in the hallway and tugged them down with a groan. A stale, earthen scent cascaded down, confirming his suspicions. He ascended into the penumbral space, his vision adjusting to the dimness. Cartons were haphazardly arranged, cloaked in layers of grime. Obsolete lamps, their shades fractured and yellowed, perched on wobbly tables. He coughed, swatting at a swirling cloud of dust particles. He began sifting through the boxes, uncovering faded photo albums, discarded playthings, and defunct Christmas ornaments. It was a somber pilgrimage through his family's history, a recollection of moments barely within his grasp. Tucked away in a corner behind a pile of outdated encyclopedias, he noticed a book bound in leather. He retrieved it, wiping away the accumulated dust. The title, stamped in tarnished gold, proclaimed, "The Stock Market, a Primer." He frowned. Why would his parents possess such a book? They never discussed investments or finance. His father practiced law, his mother socialized. The stock market felt light years removed from their gilded existence. His curiosity piqued, he opened the book. The pages were brittle and yellowed, crammed with charts, graphs, and arcane jargon. He grasped little of it, yet something about the book ignited a spark of intrigue within him. The idea that fortunes could be won or lost based on knowledge and strategy was captivating. A game, a puzzle, a gauntlet. He settled onto a dusty chest, the book spread open in his lap, and began to peruse. The stillness of the attic was broken only by the whisper of turning pages and the distant hum of the house below. As he plunged deeper into the realm of equities and bonds, a novel ambition began to take shape in his mind, a plan far more ambitious than any he'd entertained previously. A means not merely to avenge himself on his kin, but to eclipse them. A path to becoming someone they couldn't possibly overlook. Frosty peaks and financial dreams. The hushed library throbbed with a subtle vibrancy, a world away from the raucous laughter Leo pictured echoing within his parents' ski lodge. He weaved through the lofty bookshelves, the familiar mustiness of old paper a comforting presence, until the glow of computer screens beckoned from a secluded nook. Mrs. Higgins' words about democratizing knowledge rang in his ears. He intended to exploit every resource. He punched "stock market for beginners" into the search bar, unleashing a torrent of articles and videos. Initially, the sheer volume threatened to drown him, but fueled by wounded pride and budding ambition, Leo pressed on. He began with the fundamentals: shares, debentures, dividends, market cap. The terminology felt like a foreign tongue, but he transcribed notes with diligent focus, his brow furrowed in thought. Hours melted into a blur of clicks, scrolls, and scribbles. He deciphered P/E ratios, the nuances of bull and bear trends, and the imperative of diversification. The initial fog slowly dissipated, replaced by a burgeoning comprehension. A thrill coursed through him as he wrestled complex concepts into submission. His focus sharpened. He wasn't after just any stock, he craved something personal. Something tied directly to the reason he was spending his birthday sequestered in the library. He typed "ski resorts stock" into the search field. Several publicly traded behemoths appeared, their empires sprawling across mountain ranges. He dismissed them instantly. Too impersonal, too sterile. He refined his query, adding stipulations. Small ski resorts, family-run resorts, ski resorts investment. He delved deeper, sifting through obscure financial blogs and niche industry publications. Then, a discovery. An article, relegated to page 7 of a virtually unknown financial site, hinted at the possible sale of a modest, privately held ski resort nestled in the Rockies. The headline: Frosty Peaks Resort, Family Legacy at a Crossroads? Leo's heart leaped. Frosty Peaks, where his parents were currently reveling. He clicked, consuming every syllable. The resort, a quaint and charming establishment famed for its challenging runs and breathtaking vistas, had been in the same family for 3 generations. Now, however, the current owner, battling failing health and with no heir interested in assuming the mantle, was rumored to be considering offers. The article speculated on potential suitors, giant resort chains, land developers, even deep-pocketed individuals seeking a status symbol. No concrete offers had materialized, but the buzz was intensifying. A jolt of adrenaline surged through Leo. This was it, his chance. Not simply to retaliate against his parents, but to forge something lasting, something meaningful, entirely his own. The seed of an idea, planted by Mrs. Higgins and nurtured by his resentment, began to blossom into a fully formed plan. He dedicated the next hour to researching Frosty Peaks itself. He unearthed their website, a charmingly antiquated affair showcasing snow-dusted slopes, inviting hearths, and beaming families. He scrutinized the images, committing to memory the lodge layout, the run names, the lift locations. He dug further, hunting for financial data. Information was scant for a privately held entity, but he assembled fragments from disparate sources. Guest reviews bemoaning neglected upkeep, local news stories alluding to financial woes, even a forum thread lamenting the resort's antiquated infrastructure. The picture that emerged was both captivating and intimidating. Frosty Peaks was picturesque, iconic, yet demonstrably vulnerable. It craved investment, modernization, a bold vision, and Leo, despite his youth, felt certain he could deliver it. He closed his laptop, the library suddenly awash in a brighter light. The sting of anger and disappointment lingered, but it was now diluted by a burgeoning sense of purpose. He wouldn't wallow in self-pity. He would seize control. He would purchase Frosty Peaks. The sheer audacity of it brought a smile to his face. It was ludicrous, impossible, yet electrifying. He knew he faced a steep learning curve. He needed to absorb more, infinitely more, about finance, about management, about the intricacies of running a ski destination. But he possessed a starting point, a purpose, a definite objective. And he had Mrs. Higgins, his unlikely guide, ready to mentor him. Stepping out of the library and into the biting evening air, Leo gazed at the heavens, picturing the far-off, snow-draped peaks of Frosty Peaks Resort. He wasn't just indulging in wishful thinking. He was strategizing. And he wouldn't permit anyone, even his own parents, to obstruct his path. The first investment. Leo chewed his lip, the worn library book on stock valuations lying open but unread before him. The smell of aged paper and binding glue usually comforted him, but tonight it only amplified the knot of anxiety in his stomach. He needed a plan, a real plan, not just fantasies fueled by birthday cake deprivation, and he needed Mrs. Higgins. He found her watering her prized roses the next afternoon, the sun glinting off the lenses of her spectacles. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming petals. "Mrs. Higgins," Leo began, trying to keep his voice from trembling. "Do you remember when you said knowledge should be democratized?" Mrs. Higgins turned, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "Indeed, Leo. I believe information is a powerful tool and should be accessible to all." She snipped a faded bloom with practiced ease. "What's on your mind, dear?" He hesitated, then plunged in. I want to invest in the stock market." Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern. "Invest? Leo, you're barely old enough to ride a bicycle on the main road. Where would you even get the money?" "I've been saving," he explained, pulling out a small, crumpled envelope from his pocket. He poured the contents into his palm, a meager pile of crumpled bills and loose change. "From birthdays, odd jobs. It's not much, but it's all I have. Mrs." Higgins examined the pathetic little heap with a mixture of amusement and pity. "Leo, investing isn't like buying candy. It's complicated and risky. You could lose everything." "I know," Leo insisted, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "But I've been reading. I understand the basics. And I need to do this." He couldn't explain the burning resentment, the desire to prove himself, not without sounding like a spoiled brat. He simply said, "I need to take control of something." He told her about his research, about the potential sale of Frosty Peaks, carefully omitting the part about his parents. He spoke about P/E ratios, market capitalization, and the potential for growth in the leisure sector, stumbling over the terms but conveying his earnestness. "Mrs." Higgins listened patiently, her brow furrowed in thought. Finally, she sighed. "Leo, I admire your ambition. I truly do, but this is a gamble, a big one." "I know," he repeated. "But will you help me? Just to get started? You understand this stuff. You're the only one who does." The plea in his voice seemed to sway her. "All right, Leo," she conceded, tucking a stray strand of silver hair behind her ear. "I'll help you, but we're going to do this cautiously, very cautiously. No wild risks, understand?" Relief washed over Leo, so potent he almost sagged. "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins, thank you." Over the next few days, they pored over annual reports and market analyses at her kitchen table, the scent of her homemade cookies a comforting backdrop to the daunting task. Mrs. Higgins, with her years of experience and a knack for explaining complex concepts in simple terms, guided him through the labyrinthine world of finance. They settled on a small, conservative investment in a company that manufactured winter sports equipment. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and its stock price had been steadily climbing. The day they placed the order, Leo felt a surge of nervous excitement. He handed over his meager savings to Mrs. Higgins, the weight of the coins and bills feeling surprisingly heavy in his palm. He watched as she made the call, her voice calm and professional as she spoke to the broker. Then, it was done. He was an investor. The following weeks were agonizing. Leo checked the stock price obsessively, his heart pounding with each fluctuation. He devoured financial news, trying to decipher the cryptic pronouncements of market analysts. Then, a week later, Mrs. Higgins called him over, a twinkle in her eye. "Leo, come see something." He rushed to her house, his stomach churning with anticipation. She led him to her computer, where a small but significant number glowed on the screen. "The stock went up," she announced, a hint of pride in her voice. "You've made a profit, Leo." It wasn't much, a few dollars, perhaps enough to buy a fancy hot chocolate at Frosty Peaks, but to Leo, it was everything. It was proof that he could do it. He could learn, he could succeed, he could control his own destiny. The ski resort suddenly felt a little closer, a little more attainable. A slow smile spread across his face. "So," he said, his voice brimming with newfound confidence. "What's next?" Ski trip spying and market moves. Leo's family's aggressively cheerful social media presence was a constant irritant. Maya, predictably, reigned supreme on the slopes, her designer ski suit screaming money as she cackled in snippets of video. His parents, true to form, were plastered against the blurry backdrop of the lodge fireplace, mugs raised in a toast, their faces glowing with post-ski contentment. Each snapshot was a tiny splinter under his skin, inflaming his resentment. He scrolled, meticulously dissecting each pixel. It wasn't mere spite, though vindictiveness certainly played a part. Call it intelligence gathering. He was excluded from the festivities, but he could still map the terrain. He lingered on a shot of Maya struggling on what was labeled the Black Diamond Run. "Black Diamond Run looking a little dicey today," she'd quipped, adding an arsenal of anxious emojis. Leo magnified the image. The patch was an extensive slick, covering a significant portion of the descent. Negligent slope maintenance. Strike one. Another post featured his father mired in what appeared an interminable queue for the ski lift. "Lines are crazy today. Worth it for the views, though," Leo scoffed. "Worth it?" Time was currency, even on vacation. Inadequate lift management. Strike two. He shut his laptop, a dark satisfaction settling in his gut. They might be enjoying themselves, but even behind the carefully constructed veneer, fissures were emerging. Cracks he intended to exploit. He checked his stock app. A notification flashed. Market update. He opened it, bracing himself for the usual lackluster performance. Instead, the screen pulsed with exhilarating news. His initial investment in the renewable energy firm, the one Mrs. Higgins had reluctantly okayed, had exploded. A major government contract, unveiled that morning, had catapulted the stock into orbit. The figures swam before his eyes. He'd more than doubled his stake. A slow grin stretched across Leo's face. This was no longer mere pocket change. This was real clout, ammunition for a larger game. He felt a jolt of something akin to dominion. It was an intoxicating sensation, this newfound agency. He grabbed his phone and punched in Mrs. Higgins' number. "Leo, is everything all right?" Her voice held a note of apprehension. "Everything's better than all right, Mrs. Higgins," he replied, his voice buzzing with barely contained glee. "Remember that renewable energy stock we invested in?" "Of course. I monitor it daily, although I still believed it was a tad speculative for your maiden voyage." "Well, it just secured a massive government contract. The stock has skyrocketed." Silence hung in the air. Then, a quiet chuckle. "Well, I'll be. Beginner's luck, perhaps?" "Perhaps," Leo conceded. "But I was thinking, what if we liquidated it, and then reinvested in something more ambitious?" He could practically visualize Mrs. Higgins' raised eyebrows. "More ambitious? Leo, we're talking about substantial gains here. Perhaps a more cautious approach." I know," Leo interjected, striving for composure. "But I have a plan brewing. I've been doing some digging, and I think I've unearthed another opportunity, something with even greater upside." He hesitated, then opted to confide a little, careful to omit the full scope of his scheme. "It involves property and perhaps a little revitalization." "Revitalization?" Mrs. Higgins echoed, her tone laced with reservation. Leo, are you certain you're not rushing ahead? Real estate is an entirely different playing field. It demands considerable capital, considerable know-how. I know, Leo countered, his voice firm. But I'm willing to learn, and I have a feeling, a powerful instinct, that this is the right gambit. He paused, inhaling deeply. Mrs. Higgins, trust my judgment. I know what I'm doing. Another extended silence ensued. Leo held his breath, awaiting her verdict. Finally, she sighed. All right, Leo, she conceded. You've certainly demonstrated a flair for this. But promise me you'll proceed with caution and heed my counsel. I promise, Leo said, a triumphant grin illuminating his face. I always do. He disconnected the call, his pulse racing with anticipation. The ski resort, with its treacherous slopes and endless queues, was about to encounter an adversary it never anticipated. An adversary intimately acquainted with its vulnerabilities, an adversary just warming up. A risky proposition. The aroma of aged leather mingled with the sharp tang of lemon polish in Mrs. Higgins's office, an oddly comforting scent at odds with the jittery current now coursing through Leo. His leg bounced, a frantic drumbeat against the stoic tick-tock of the grandfather clock. The preliminary assessment of Frosty Peak's finances is underwhelming. Mrs. Higgins stated, her tone as crisp as a freshly starched shirt. She adjusted her glasses, a small, efficient gesture. However, your strategy, while ambitious, could offset some of the inherent liabilities. Leo's focus sharpened. Ambitious is good, right? We're not playing it safe here. He conjured the image of his parents preening in their expensive ski attire, completely oblivious to the gathering storm. He needed to move swiftly. Mrs. Higgins exhaled, a breath that stirred the papers arrayed on her desk. It suggests we might be stretching ourselves too thin, especially considering this recent development. She tapped a manila folder, starkly labeled in crimson, Confidential, Frosty Peaks Acquisitions. Leo felt a thrum of alarm. What development is that? Another entity appears to be vying for a substantial stake in Frosty Peaks, she revealed, opening the folder to expose dense blocks of legal text. Alpine Investments. They specialize in optimizing ski resorts. Optimizing? A lead weight settled in Leo's gut. Think. Inflated prices, gutted services, and maximized profits at any cost to the community or the skier experience, Mrs. Higgins elaborated, a hint of displeasure coloring her voice. Their reputation precedes them, and it's not pretty. Suddenly, the slow lift lines, the exorbitant cost of hot chocolate, the threadbare rental gear, annoyances he'd shrugged off, took on a sinister light. Alpine Investments wouldn't just tolerate those shortcomings, they'd weaponize them. They would bleed Frosty Peaks dry, turning it into a heartless corporate playground. How many shares are they after? Leo's voice was strained. Mrs. Higgins scanned the document. Enough for controlling interest. Roughly 42%. 42%! The number hung in the air like a threat. With that kind of leverage, they could do irreversible damage. His yearning to own the resort, to prove himself to his parents, abruptly transformed into a more profound imperative, to shield it, to preserve the echoes of skiing with his grandfather, building snow fortresses with his cousins, the inexplicable enchantment that clung to Frosty Peaks. He surged to his feet, the chair screeching against the polished wood. We have to stop them, Mrs. Higgins arched a brow. Stop them? Leo, we're dealing with a corporation worth millions. Our resources are... We buy the shares ourselves, he declared, his mind already racing. Mrs. Higgins's jaw slackened slightly. Leo, that's madness. Even with the yield from your renewable energy investment and the loan I'm cautiously optimistic about securing, we're nowhere near possessing the kind of capital necessary to acquire 42% of Frosty Peaks. Not 40, 2%. Leo countered, his thoughts coalescing. 25. just enough to prevent Alpine Investments from gaining a majority, enough to force negotiation, enough to complicate things. He strode to the window, surveying the vibrant city stretching below. The metropolis throbbed with potential. He glimpsed not just buildings and vehicles, but deals unfolding, destinies shifting. He could practically taste the ambition, the momentum. It's a long shot, Mrs. Higgins, I understand that. But if Alpine Investments sinks its claws into Frosty Peaks, it's more than just a bad investment, it's a travesty. It's losing something irreplaceable. He pivoted, his gaze imploring. We have to make the attempt. Mrs. Higgins remained silent, her eyes locked on his. He could practically hear the internal gears grinding, the battle waging between her inherent prudence and the undeniable fervor burning in his eyes. Finally, she released a sigh, deeper and more resigned than before. All right, Leo, she conceded, her voice hushed. Let's explore this improbable gamble. The deal is done. The buzzing ballast of Mrs. Higgins's overhead lamp cast a sickly pall over the spread of documents. Leo winced. A headache threatened to erupt behind his temples. Sleep had become a luxury these past few days, sacrificed to lukewarm coffee and the electric hum of high-stakes deals. Electronic transfer confirmed, Mrs. Higgins stated, her voice a gravelly bassline. She slid a printed receipt across the scarred table. Leo snatched it up, the figures swimming before his tired eyes. Genuine. Nearly a quarter of Frosty Peaks locked down. Is that all? He asked, a disorienting mix of elation and disbelief flooding him. Mrs. Higgins emitted a dry, rustling laugh like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. Far from it. Next comes the real grind, paperwork, a veritable Everest of it. She indicated a precariously balanced stack of legal briefs. But the gut-wrenching part, the sheer terror of it all, that's behind us. Plunging into the world of finance had been a trial by fire. Leo, fueled by online research and a naive confidence, had quickly learned that PowerPoint presentations bore little resemblance to actual wheeling and dealing. He'd stumbled over arcane terms, endured condescending smiles from polished brokers, and wrestled with his own fraying nerves countless times. Mrs. Higgins, however, had been his unwavering compass. Her quiet mastery, forged in the crucible of running her late husband's enterprise, proved invaluable. She knew the right people, the crucial questions, and precisely when to press the advantage. A formidable exterior shielded a razor-sharp intellect and fierce protectiveness of those she cared for. I still can't fathom your faith in me, Leo admitted, raking a hand through his already chaotic hair. I trust your heart, Leo, Mrs. Higgins replied, her gaze unwavering. And sometimes, a dash of audacity is exactly what's needed to upset the apple cart. The following days compressed into a whirlwind of conference calls, contract signings, and raw, jittery anticipation. Leo mastered the labyrinthine language of lawyers, bartered with seasoned professionals, and held his ground in boardrooms filled with twice his age. He discovered a latent strategic aptitude, a keen awareness of his adversary's next play. The invisible boy had become a contender. He even managed to wrangle a meeting with Mr. Abernathy, the weary-looking proprietor of Frosty Peaks, in his cluttered office overlooking the ski runs. Abernathy, perpetually tanned and radiating exhaustion, seemed mostly relieved. Just want to see it in good hands, Abernathy croaked, his voice rough-edged. Alpine Investments, they'd bleed it dry, turn it into another sterile corporate clone. Leo affirmed, feeling a surge of resolve. That won't happen on my watch. The final gauntlet, the shareholder meeting. Leo with Mrs. Higgins at his side entered the room with a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The space pulsed with the presence of financial titans, individuals whose faces populated news channels and whose decisions swayed markets. Representatives from Alpine Investments sat rigid, their expressions impenetrable, their eyes glinting with calculation. The meeting stretched on, a tedious barrage of financial terminology and projections. Leo listened intently, biding his time. Finally, the vote on the Alpine Investments takeover was called. The air crackled with tension. Each ballot cast resonated like a judge's gavel, the fate of Frosty Peaks hanging precariously. Leo followed the process, his heart hammering against his ribs as the votes were counted. When the final tally was revealed, a wave of astonishment rippled through the room. Alpine Investments had fallen short. They lacked the controlling stake. A tidal wave of relief surged through Leo. He had prevailed. The underdog, the kid who was always overlooked, had rescued Frosty Peaks. He met Mrs. Higgins's gaze across the room. A hint of a smile graced her lips. A subtle nod, almost imperceptible. Then came the reckoning. He had to inform his family what he'd accomplished. Demonstrate that he was more than the forgotten son, the perennial afterthought. He was a guardian, a champion, a force to be reckoned with. He was prepared. He was terrified. The new owner. The vintage Land Rover, tires crunching a crisp rhythm on packed snow, delivered Mrs. Higgins and Leo to the Frosty Peaks parking lot. A frigid, keen air, a world away from the cloying anxiety that had dogged Leo since his winning bid, stung his lungs. It was a bracing sensation, like a clean slate etched in ice. Ready? Mrs. Higgins' steady tone cut through the maelstrom of his nerves. Her brief, firm handclasp was a grounding force. He managed a nod, throat tight. This was it, the reckoning, as ready as I'll get. The resort loomed ahead, an imposing edifice promising warmth and cheer in its plume of wood smoke and pine, a promise soured by the turbulent undercurrent he carried. They'll be in the dining hall, Leo stated, his voice constricted. He knew his parents' routines. Dinner was a performance, a ritual of polite smiles and shallow talk. Inside, the dining hall buzzed with the joyful din of vacationers. Silverware chimed, conversations rippled, a child's peal of laughter echoed, a foreign symphony. He located his family instantly. Positioned at their usual window-side table, bathed in the ochre glow of the sunset, his father gesticulated emphatically, his mother offered practiced nods, and Maya scrolled through her phone, her face a careful study in boredom. Resentment surged. They appeared, content, unburdened, unaware. He drew a steadying breath and walked toward them, Mrs. Higgins a silent, unwavering presence at his flank. With each step, the dining hall's clamor receded, replaced by the thunder of his own pulse. He halted a few feet away. "Excuse me," he began, his voice betraying a slight tremor. His father looked up, his brow furrowed in irritation. "Leo? What are you doing up here?" Maya's head jerked up, perfectly arched eyebrows conveying surprise. "Leo? What?" His mother's eyes widened in astonishment. "Darling, how did you manage to—" He ignored the barrage of questions, his gaze sweeping across their faces. The words needed to be said. They needed to understand the seismic shift about to occur. "I have something to tell you all," he announced, his voice gaining strength with each syllable. Heads swiveled, conversations ebbed. The lively murmur of the dining hall dissolved into an expectant stillness. A waiter hovered, a nervous sentinel, his gaze ping-ponging between Leo and his family. Raising his voice, Leo ensured his words carried. "I know you've always seen me as just Leo, the overlooked son, the one who doesn't quite measure up." He paused, inhaling deeply. "But that's not who I am anymore." The color in his father's face deepened to a shade he hadn't witnessed since the mailbox incident. Maya's shock was palpable, her phone abandoned in her lap. His mother's expression remained an enigma. "I wanted to prove," Leo declared, his voice resonating with newfound conviction, "that I'm capable of more than you imagined, that I can achieve something, that I can be significant." He paused, allowing his pronouncement to land. He locked eyes with his father. "You always emphasize the importance of earning your keep." He turned to Maya. "And you always dismissed me as a failure." He offered his mother a wan smile. "I simply wanted your approval." He took one last breath. "So I bought this resort." A collective intake of breath rippled through the dining hall. Silverware clattered against porcelain, conversations died in their throats. All eyes were riveted on him, on his family, on the unfolding drama. His father sputtered, "You bought what exactly?" Leo advanced, his gaze unwavering. "I bought Frosty Peaks. I am the new proprietor." He indicated the stunned audience with a sweeping gesture. Lock, stock, and barrel. The ensuing silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the fire crackling in the hearth. Then, a woman at a nearby table choked on her Pinot Noir. "Mrs. Higgins stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Leo's shoulder. "That's correct. Leo has successfully acquired controlling interest in Alpine Investments Holdings here at Frosty Peaks. The resort is now under his ownership." His mother spoke first, her voice a mere breath. "Leo, how is this even possible?" He looked at her, a torrent of conflicting emotions swirling within him. Triumph, vindication, and a lingering ache of sadness. "I earned it, Mom, every single penny." Maya finally recovered her voice, her tone shrill. "This is unbelievable. You can't just buy a ski resort." "Apparently I can," Leo countered, a flicker of a smile gracing his lips. His father shoved back his chair, the harsh screech against the floorboards amplifying the tension. He rose to his feet, his face a rigid mask of fury. "Leo Maxwell, we need to have a serious discussion right now." But Leo stood his ground, meeting his father's incandescent gaze head-on. "Actually, Dad," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I believe it's time you listened to me for a change." Frosty Peaks reimagined. The hush following Leo's declaration pressed down, a weight intensified by the sharp scent of evergreens and the distant promise of hearth fires. Supported by Mrs. Higgins' quiet confidence, Leo pressed on, his tone firm despite the tremor in his gut. "I didn't acquire Frosty Peaks to boast. I envisioned rescuing it. It deserves a future, a chance to thrive. And, frankly, I yearned to create something worthwhile for all of us." He swept his hand towards the bustling mountain's base. "This resort is worn down. The snow cannons are antiquated, the lodge leaks heat, and the ski school needs a serious overhaul. My goal is to modernize Frosty Peaks, positioning it as a premier family destination, not just a haven for expert skiers." A dry cough from his father echoed in the sudden stillness. "Leo, this is ambitious. Are you sure you're equipped for this?" Leo met his father's questioning gaze, a familiar pang of insecurity momentarily flickering across his face before he banished it. "I've been educating myself, and I have Mrs. Higgins." He nodded toward his neighbor, who offered a reassuring smile. Maya, uncharacteristically subdued, finally chimed in, her voice laced with incredulity. "So, you're turning it into some sort of glorified playground?" "Not quite," Leo retorted, his mind already buzzing with ideas. "But I do want to amplify its family appeal. A vastly improved ski school, a dedicated learning zone with gentle gradients, and undoubtedly more activities for non-skiers. Trails for snowshoeing, perhaps a skating rink, a dedicated tubing hill." A surprised arch of his mother's brow. "That actually sounds rather lovely." Leo seized on this endorsement. "I need your input," he declared, addressing them all. "You've been coming here for ages. What enhancements do you believe Frosty Peaks requires?" The initial disbelief gradually softened into hesitant interest. The ensuing days unfolded in unexpected brainstorming sessions. Maya, surprisingly, unveiled a trove of concepts to revitalize the social atmosphere: a redesigned après-ski venue featuring live bands, a chic cafe, and proposals for themed events. His father, displaying an unexpected expertise in alpine equipment, volunteered advice on upgrading the rental facilities and investing in more efficient snowmaking technology. Even his mother, generally focused on aesthetic details, contributed ideas to enhance the lodge's warmth and comfort. Leo absorbed their suggestions, meticulously documenting them, and most importantly, acted upon them. He engaged local builders to reinforce the lodge's aging framework, replaced the frayed carpeting with luxurious, vibrant alternatives, and implemented a cutting-edge snowmaking system, guaranteeing consistent powder, even during milder conditions. He invested in modern skis and snowboards for the rental shop and recruited accomplished instructors for the ski school. He even meticulously crafted a beginner's zone, complete with a magic carpet and slopes perfectly suited for newcomers. Maya's ideas breathed new life into the après-ski scene. The lounge now throbbed with live music on weekends. The enticing aroma of fresh coffee permeated the air from the revamped cafe, and themed nights, such as Snowy Cinnamon Nights, drew enthusiastic crowds. With each advancement, Leo felt an unfamiliar surge of accomplishment. It transcended simply proving himself. It was about crafting something remarkable, something that would spark joy in others, and crucially fostering a connection with his family he had long craved. His 11th birthday dawned, a world apart from the previous year's somber affair. There was no stilted phone call, no forced merriment. This year, Frosty Peaks was the vibrant heart of the celebration. He awoke to the tantalizing smell of blueberry pancakes drifting from the lodge kitchen, his mother's special touch. Banners and balloons adorned the lodge, and a magnificent cake, sculpted in the image of a snow-laden peak, commanded attention on the main table. After breakfast, they ventured onto the slopes. Leo, astride a pristine snowboard his father had personally selected, took the lead, carving graceful arcs through the freshly groomed runs. Maya, unexpectedly, remained by his side, offering guidance and encouragement. Even his mother, wrapped in a stylish ski suit, braved a few tentative runs on the beginner's slopes. As the sun dipped towards the horizon, painting the valley in hues of rose and gold, they gathered around a bonfire crackling merrily outside the lodge. His father presented him with a steaming cup of hot chocolate, and Maya gifted him with a hand-knitted scarf in his favorite color. "Happy birthday, Leo," his mother said, her voice filled with genuine affection. "We're incredibly proud of you." Leo surveyed his family, their faces aglow in the flickering firelight. A wave of pure happiness washed over him, a warmth that radiated through his being. He had succeeded. He had not only reinvented Frosty Peaks, but he had also transformed his relationship with his family. The mountain air, bracing and pure, carried the echoes of laughter and joyful conversation. As he extinguished the candles on his snow-covered mountain cake, his wish wasn't for increased wealth or influence. He wished for this moment to stretch into eternity. He now possessed a ski resort, yes, but, far more significantly, he had earned something immeasurably more precious: his family's respect, their admiration, and their love.